fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece about the actual physics and economics of pair housing your dairy calves.
Yeah, and we're pulling from a massive stack of sources today to really do this right. I mean, we've got a 2024 Journal of Dairy Science paper, a 2025 scoping review from Frontiers in Veterinary Science, and just this really extensive field data from both the University of British Columbia and the University of Florida.
Right.
So the mission of this deep dive is to figure out if breaking the golden rule of calf rearing, the individual hutch, if that is actually the secret to saving your farm 10 grand a year, all while making your cows better competitors at the feed bunk.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, sounds completely backwards to anyone who has spent their entire life raising calves.
Oh, totally.
But before we get to the how and the why of, actually tearing down the walls between your hutches, we really need to talk about why we are even having this conversation right now. Because if you are listening to this on the tractor right now, you already feel the massive squeeze on replacements.
Right, you feel it in your wallet.
Exactly. But hearing the actual national context, it really puts a chill down your spine. According to the USDA's January 2025 cattle report, the total heifer inventory is sitting at 3.914 million head.
Let me just put that 3.914 million number into a historical perspective for you for a second. That is the lowest that specific inventory number has been since 1978.
Wow.
1978.
Jimmy Carter was in the White House in 1978. You're talking about a generational low here. I mean, most of the people managing your calf barns today weren't even born the last time we had this few replacement heifers in the national pipeline.
Yeah, and if you think we are just, at the bottom of a normal cycle and things will naturally bounce back by the fall, think again. Because the projections coming out of CoBank show that this number is going to drop even further. Right, there's no quick fix.
No, not at all. We are not looking at any sort of structural recovery starting until maybe 2027. We are in a deep, deep structural deficit.
And because of that deficit, the stakes for your dairy operation have literally never been higher.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cold, hard cash value of the animals sitting in your hutches this morning, because replacement prices are absolutely astronomical right now.
Oh, they're painful.
If you look at average Holsteins, just your standard middle-of-the-road heifers, they are commanding around $3,300 per head. And if your operation is dealing in premium strings, the ones confirmed with sex semen, you are seeing them clear $4,000 in markets like the upper Midwest.
Think about what that means for your daily routine, though. Every single wet calf that hits the ground on your dairy is worth more today than at any point in the last 2 decades. The math has entirely shifted beneath our feet. A dead calf isn't just a frustrating loss anymore. It is a massive financial blow. You simply cannot afford to lose them. And maybe more importantly, you can't afford for them to underperform 2 years from now when they finally hit your milking string.
Which brings us to the ultimate contrarian pivot we are unpacking today. We are talking about ditching the individual calf hutch.
I can hear the collective gasp from here.
Right, I know. The individual hutch has been the holy grail of dairy biosecurity for generations. But the data we are digging into today comes from a physicist turned dairy researcher who has proven that keeping calves in pairs can save a 300-cow dairy $9,900 a year while actually improving their welfare.
Okay, I am going to play the skeptic here. Because when you first slid this article across the table to me, my immediate reaction was, a physicist. What does someone who spent their college years studying quantum mechanics know about scraping out a calf hutch at 5 in the morning?
I knew you were going to say that.
I mean, it sounds like the absolute classic disconnect between academic theory and farm-level reality. Usually, the research we see on calves stops the day they are weaned. We measure their starter intake, we put them on a scale for their weaning weight, and we call it a day. If they hit the target weight, we slap ourselves on the back.
But stopping the clock at weaning creates a massive blind spot for farmers regarding long-term behavioral development. Let me introduce you to the researcher, Emily Miller-Cushon, because her unconventional path is actually the key to why this research is so disruptive.
Okay, let's hear it.
She grew up in rural Ontario, surrounded by agriculture, but she went to the University of Waterloo for a highly rigorous physics and mathematical physics program. And Waterloo is not a joke. It is one of the top STEM schools in North America. She was doing intense abstract math, but by her senior year, she hit a wall.
Let me guess, she couldn't see how calculating the velocity of a subatomic particle helped anyone in the real world.
You nailed it. She couldn't connect the abstract physics to the tangible things she actually cared about. So the summer before her final year, she assisted with some animal science research. Her mentor saw how lit up she was by the farm data, way more engaged than she was with the physics, and suggested she make a hard pivot.
So she just walked away from physics.
Entirely. She entered a doctoral program in animal science at the University of Guelph, studying under Trevor DeVries at their Animal Welfare Center, finished her PhD, and now runs an incredibly influential calf welfare program at the University of Florida.
Look, I hear the backstory, and it's a great human interest piece. But if I am a producer listening to this while mixing a batch of milk replacer, my healthy skepticism is still flashing bright red.
Sure.
We have veterinarians, we have lifers who have studied ruminant digestion for 40 years. Why should I redesign my entire housing setup based on someone who started out looking at physics equations?
I expected you to push back on that, but consider how a physicist actually processes information. She brought her entire physics toolkit with her to the dairy barn. She brought intense statistical rigor. She brought a deep comfort with massive long-term data sets that would make most people's eyes just glaze over.
Right, she likes the math.
In physics, you are trained from day one to question deeply held baseline assumptions. You never accept that something works just because that is how we have always done it. You test the baseline. That habit of questioning the unwritten rules of the dairy industry is exactly what calf research was starving for.
I will give you that. If there is one fatal flaw in this industry, it is doing things a certain way, because Grandpa poured the concrete that way and his dad built the barn that way.
Exactly.
The individual calf hutch is the ultimate sacred cow.
Whoa.
We just accept it as gospel because we are terrified of the alternative.
Well, the broader scientific community is certainly not terrified of her alternative. We need to validate the weight of her research before we get into the numbers. Because she didn't just publish a neat little paper in a fringe journal. She was awarded the 2025 PECASE. PECASE, for those outside the DC grant bubble, that stands for the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. It is the highest U.S. government award given to early career researchers across all scientific disciplines.
Wait, so the federal government looked at every young scientist in the country, across medicine, engineering, all of it, and said her work on dairy calves was among the most groundbreaking.
Yes. And on top of that, she won the 2025 ADSA Foundation Scholar Award in dairy production. So the data she is bringing to your farm isn't just a theory. It is award-winning, rigorously vetted science that is shifting paradigms at the highest possible levels.
All right, you have built the credibility. Let's get into the mud. We need an industry reality check here, because the deeply ingrained belief, the absolute, everyone knows this fact of dairy farming, is that individual hutches are the only barrier standing between your calves and a total respiratory disaster.
Right, the old dogma.
The old logic dictates that if you put two calves together, they're going to suck on each other's navels, they're going to share scours, and one is absolutely going to give the other pneumonia.
And Miller-Cushon's team took that exact narrative and put it under a microscope. Let's look at her 5-year study funded by USDA NIFA, which ran from 2020 through 2025. What makes this study almost unheard of is the timeline. She tracked these specific calves from birth all the way through their second lactation.
Which requires an insane amount of funding and patience. Like we said earlier, most researchers pack up their clipboards at day 60. Tracking an animal into its second lactation means she is measuring how a housing decision you made on day 2 of a calf's life impacts an adult cow competing in the milking string 3 years later.
Which is huge.
That is the only metric a farmer actually cares about. We don't raise calves just to take cute pictures of them. We raise them to become highly profitable, durable cows.
Well, the behavioral breakthrough that came out of this 5-year tracking, which was published in the 2024 Journal of Dairy Science paper, is fascinating. They tracked Holstein heifers raised in pairs versus those raised individually. Then they observed their behavior during a social regrouping and a housing transition when they were pregnant heifers. They specifically looked at how these animals reacted under competitive pressure.
Let's translate competitive pressure into plain farmer English for a second. We're talking about that brutal moment when a fresh 2-year-old heifer gets dropped into a pen with older, mature boss cows.
It's intimidating.
Oh, it's a war zone. The bunk space is tight, the older cows are throwing their heads around, and that young heifer has to figure out how to get her head through the headlocks and eat without getting bullied out of the way. What do the numbers actually show?
The pair-housed animals spent 4.2 more minutes per hour feeding. But the metric that really jumps off the page is their feed bunk visits. The pair-housed heifers visited the feed bunk 1.5 times per hour. The individually raised heifers, only 0.8 times per hour.
That's nearly double.
Exactly.
Yep.
The heifers that grew up with a roommate were visiting the bunk nearly twice as often under the exact same competitive pressure.
Let me stop you right there, because if you are milking cows right now, this is your aha moment.
Yeah.
If you have a heifer that is willing to fight for bunk space, a heifer that marches up to the feed 1.5 times an hour instead of hiding in the back of the freestalls, she is consuming significantly more dry matter.
Yep.
And dry matter intake is the absolute engine of milk production, period. If she doesn't eat, she doesn't milk. What this data says is that whether she fights for that TMR or backs down to a boss cow was hardwired into her brain by whether she had a buddy in her hutch 2 years prior.
The study concluded that preweaning social housing establishes long-term effects on behavior and the ability to adapt to novel environments. It all comes down to social learning. Calves learn to eat by watching their pen mates. We severely underestimate the role of the social environment, but calves develop preferences for feeds that others in their group are eating.
Which makes sense.
They learn how to interact, how to yield, and how to assert themselves way before they ever see a freestall barn. If they are in a solitary hutch, they never learn a single social eating cue.
It makes total sense if you step back from the farm. If you raise a kid in an isolated room for years and then suddenly drop them into a chaotic high school cafeteria, they are going to be terrified. They won't know how to navigate the social dynamics to get their lunch tray.
That's a perfect analogy.
We're doing the exact same thing to our heifers.
Yeah.
We put them in solitary confinement, and then we stand around scratching our heads when they act timid at the bunk as fresh cows.
And Miller-Cushon pointed out in a recent interview that pair-housed calves actually eat more solid feed earlier in life precisely because of this social learning. They figure the grain bucket out together. But I can hear you winding up to ask the obvious question here. You are thinking about the BRD myth, the bovine respiratory disease fear.
Oh, absolutely I am. Because that is the very first piece of pushback you will get from any herd manager. Sure, they might be bolder at the bunk 2 years from now, but if they die of pneumonia at 3 weeks old, they're going to make it to the milking string to show off that boldness.
Right.
We have been preached to for decades that shared airspace in a hutch equals shared respiratory bugs. End of story.
Let's look at the 2025 scoping review published in Frontiers in Veterinary Science to address that head-on. This review aggregated pair housing studies published since 2016. They look specifically at the health outcomes. Out of 7 specific BRD studies that they reviewed, take a guess at how many showed an association between pair housing and increased respiratory disease.
Well, knowing how these deep dives go, I'm going to guess the number is shockingly low. 1, 2,
0.
0.
Out of the 7 studies reviewed, exactly 7 showed NO association between pair housing and an increase in respiratory disease. And I want to make this crystal clear to you listening right now. This is not cherry-picked data to support a narrative. That was the entirety of the BRD data they examined in that review. We are talking about studies from UC Davis, UW-Madison, the University of Florida, UBC across the board. Social housing, specifically pair housing, did not increase BRD incidence.
I am having a hard time wrapping my head around that.
Yeah.
Because it is a massive paradigm shift. If you were telling me that putting 2 calves together doesn't actually spike my pneumonia rates, then the primary foundational argument for keeping them isolated completely crumbles.
It really does.
But here's the thing. Farmers don't buy reciprocating saws and start cutting walls out of their hutches just because a paper says it improves welfare. They change their setups when the math demands it. If they're equally healthy, where is the cash?
Let's follow the money and break down that $9,900 advantage we teased at the start, tailored specifically for a standard 300 cow dairy. To anchor the math, we need to look at national pre-weaned mortality rates.
Okay, way out.
The 2014 NAHMS data, which is the National Animal Health Monitoring System, the gold standard for USDA benchmarks, put national pre-weaned mortality around 5.0%. A new NAHMS study is pending, but let's be realistic about what is happening on the ground. Many commercial farms are running closer to 6%.
Sadly, 6% is very common. When you factor in the brutal winter cold snaps, unpredictable scours outbreaks, and the sheer labor shortage, meaning your calf feeders have less time to observe each individual animal, 6% happens fast.
It does.
So on a 300-cow dairy, assuming you are calving relatively evenly year-round, a 6% pre-weaned mortality rate on your heifer crop means you are hauling about 9 dead heifer calves to the compost pile a year.
Let's tie those 9 dead heifers back to the replacement costs we established earlier. With an average Holstein replacement sitting at $3,300 right now, those 9 calves represent between $25,000 and $36,000 in lost inventory value.
That hurts to think about.
And keep in mind, that is just the raw, unrealized replacement value. That doesn't even begin to calculate the sunk costs of the milk replacer you already fed them, the vet bills and electrolytes you pumped into them trying to save them, or the labor hours your team wasted.
It is a staggering leak in farm profitability when you look at it annually. But you just told me the BRD rates are the same, not necessarily lower. So how does pair housing actually fix that leak and save us money?
The literature shows that while BRD might remain neutral, pair housing improves overall health resilience and reduces other major issues. Miller-Cushon's own 2021 JDS work found a tendency for reduced scours in pair-housed calves.
Interesting. Less scours.
When calves are less stressed, when they learn to eat solid feed earlier because of that social learning we discussed, their immune systems are fundamentally better supported. The aggregated data suggests that if a farm switches to pair housing, they can conservatively drop that overall mortality rate from 6% down to 4%.
Okay, let's run that through the calculator. Dropping from 6% to 4% mortality on a 300-cow dairy saves you 3 heifer calves a year.
Multiply those 3 saved calves by that $3,300 average replacement cost, and it equals exactly $9,900 saved annually, just in retained inventory. You are putting almost 10 grand back into your operations equity just by letting 2 calves share a space.
To a farmer writing checks, that is incredibly tangible. 10 grand pays for a mountain of milk replacer or a couple months of your calf feeder's salary. But there is also a growth velocity aspect to this, right? It's not just about minimizing death loss. It's about how fast and efficiently they grow before you wean them.
The weight gain bonus is undeniable. Research out of the University of British Columbia published in 2023 isolated the specific metric. They found that pair-housed calves averaged an advantage of 130 grams per day in weight gain pre-weaning compared to individually housed calves. And this has been a consistent finding across multiple massive Canadian studies.
To someone sitting in an office, 130 grams a day might sound like rounding error. But let's look at a 60-day weaning period. That compounds into nearly 17 extra pounds at weaning.
That's a huge difference on a calf.
A bigger, heavier calf with a more developed skeletal frame transitions off milk better, reaches breeding weight earlier, and ultimately calves in as a larger, more competitive animal. What did Miller-Cushon's Florida study show regarding this growth?
Her 2025 study at UF was a massive undertaking. They looked at 100 pens, 50 individual versus 50 paired, and showed clear, statistically significant performance benefits from pair housing right from birth. But the most fascinating variable they uncovered was that these advantages were particularly strong during the cooler months.
Which paints a very vivid picture. Picture your farm in February. The wind is howling and the temperature is sitting at minus 10 degrees. An isolated calf in a single plastic hutch is shivering, burning every single calorie of that expensive milk replacer just to keep her core temperature high enough to keep her heart beating.
It's all going to maintenance.
Exactly. But she has a buddy. They cuddle up like a pile of puppies in the deep straw. They share body heat. They keep their core temperatures up naturally. And those calories from the milk replacer actually go towards skeletal growth instead of just basic survival.
The physiological math works beautifully, but as a practical dairyman, I know you still have logistical nightmares running through your head. Let's pivot to case studies and actual implementation on the farm, because the theory only matters if you can execute it.
Let's tackle the biggest, ugliest practical fear first. Solving the cross-sucking problem. We acknowledged it earlier, but we need to dive deep into it. Farmers are terrified of cross-sucking.
It's gross.
If you have ever walked a pen of recently weaned heifers and seen them grouped up, aggressively sucking on each other's ears, navels, or developing teats, it drives you absolutely crazy. We put them in individual hutches specifically to stop that oral fixation from ruining developing udder tissue or causing blind quarters down the road.
Miller-Cushon's data gives us a surprisingly simple, almost shockingly low-tech fix for this. To completely reduce abnormal oral behaviors, especially around that high-stress weaning period when the urge to suck is highest, all you have to do is provide hay from day one alongside their starter grain.
Wait, hold on. Day one. We have been preached to for years by nutritionists not to give hay early on. The dogma is that hay takes up physical space in the rumen and prevents them from eating enough of the highly digestible starter grain they need to develop their rumen papillae. You were telling me to throw hay in there immediately.
I know it goes against the old dogma, but her research and the broader literature shows that providing hay from the time you introduce starter grain universally benefits the calves. It gives them a physical, natural outlet for that innate oral foraging behavior.
So they chew the hay instead of their roommate.
Right. If they're chewing on long-stem hay, they are not chewing on their penmate's ear. The data consistently shows it drastically reduces cross-sucking. It is a low-cost, incredibly effective intervention that solves your biggest fear.
All right, I will concede that a handful of hay is a cheap fix for the cross-sucking. But let's talk about the facilities, because I am not going to march into my loan officer's office and ask for a $500,000 line of credit to build a brand new state-of-the-art pair-housing calf barn just because a physicist published a paper. My concrete pads are already poured, and my white plastic hutches are sitting right there.
You don't need a new barn, and you don't need a loan. This is where Laura Whalen's commercial farm study at UBC is so critical. She proved that facility conversions can happen with the exact equipment you already own. The setup she used on commercial dairies was incredibly simple. She literally just pushed two standard individual hutches together and created a shared outdoor fence space in front of them.
You are saying the massive infrastructure overhaul is just pushing two pieces of plastic side by side and wrapping one big wire panel around the front of both.
That is literally it. 2 calves, 2 hutches, 1 shared yard. The calves have the option to sleep in separate hutches if they want their space, or they can cuddle up in one together. Other operations have converted their existing super hutches just by taking a reciprocating saw and removing a shared plastic wall between 2 hutches placed end to end.
That's brilliant.
UW-Madison's Dairy Welfare Program actually published a step-by-step introduction guide for commercial farms, specifically designed for operations using existing individual hutches. The capital cost is basically zero. It is just the labor time required to rearrange your existing plastic.
That completely removes the financial barrier to entry. If I don't have to pour new concrete or buy new steel, I can test this concept tomorrow morning. But I do have a major question about group size. If pairing 2 calves together is good, is throwing 8 of them together better? What if I just take a giant super hutch and throw 10 calves in it?
You have to be very careful there. The data provides a golden rule of group size, and it is a hard boundary. Pair housing exactly 2 calves works beautifully, but the data shows that disease risk starts to climb significantly, almost exponentially, once you get above 8 calves per pen.
Which makes sense.
And this is especially true if you are running a continuous flow system where you are constantly adding new wet calves to an older group.
Because when you do that, you are mixing completely different levels of immunity. The older calves are shedding pathogens that the 2-day-old calf has absolutely zero defense against. It's a recipe for a massive scours outbreak.
To keep the biosecurity math manageable and safe, you need to stick strictly to pairs, or at least very small static groups of similar ages where it is all in, all out. Pair housing gives you the behavioral and welfare benefits of social interaction without crossing that dangerous threshold into high disease transmission risk.
Okay, we have the economic math, we have the facility solution with the reciprocating saw, and we have the disease mitigation strategy. But I want to zoom out for a second and look at the future implications and the regulatory reality hitting our industry.
It's coming.
Because even if a farmer is listening to this in his truck, stubbornly gripping the steering wheel and saying, I don't care about the 1.5 bunk visits, my individual hutches are fine, the industry is moving, whether U.S. producers like it or not.
The global industry is absolutely moving, and it is moving fast. Let's look at the coming mandates internationally. Canada has a draft code of practice for the care and handling of dairy cattle. This isn't just a suggestion. This draft actually mandates that healthy calves must be housed in pairs or groups by 2 to 4 weeks of age.
Mandatory.
Yes, and that mandate becomes effective by 2031.
2031 sounds far away to a civilian, but in farming years, that is right around the corner. That is barely 2 full heifer life cycles away. And it isn't just Canada driving this, right?
The Netherlands is targeting an even more aggressive timeline of 2030 for similar pair or group housing requirements. The implication here for the American listener is massive. If your U.S. operation ships genetics, embryos, or dairy products that eventually end up in these international supply chains, and most major co-ops do, you are going to be forced to comply with these global standards.
We all know exactly how this works domestically, too. It starts in Europe or Canada. The multinational processors adopt it to protect their public image, and then they bring those standards right to our doorstep. Processor audits are already evolving. The farm program, which basically dictates whether you even have a market to ship your milk in the U.S., is increasingly looking at calf welfare metrics. And let me guess who is involved in that.
Emily Miller-Cushon was just appointed to their animal care committee, the very researcher whose data we've been analyzing for the last hour.
When the researcher who proved that pair housing is superior gets put on the committee that writes the processor audits, the writing is on the wall in permanent marker. The pipeline from interesting academic research to mandatory processor requirement is getting incredibly short. It is shrinking from decades down to just a few years.
It really is.
I will argue all day long that staying ahead of these mandates and adapting your farm now on your own terms is vastly cheaper and less stressful than scrambling to retrofit your barn when the dairy co-op field rep shows up with a clipboard and threatens to pull your milk contract.
Adapting now allows you to figure out the labor flows, the hutch placement, and the feeding protocols without a gun to your head. Which brings us to our contrarian takes and action plans. Because there is a very strong, very vocal wait-and-watch narrative out there among top producers. You hear guys saying, look, my pre-wean mortality is already under 3%. I am a top-tier calf raiser. I don't need to change my individual hutches because my calves simply aren't dying.
I know plenty of herdsmen exactly like that. Their calf barns are immaculate. They wash every bottle with hot water and acid. Their colostrum protocols are bulletproof, and their death loss is basically zero. It is really hard to look those guys in the eye and tell them to mess with success.
The analytical pushback you have to give them is that they are only measuring success up to day 60. Yes, your mortality is under 3%. Congratulations. But what about your fresh heifer feed intake? Are they slow to compete at the bunk post-calving? Are your 2-year-olds lagging in their first lactation peaks compared to what your mature herd is doing?
That is the hidden bottleneck that nobody tracks back to the calf barn. A farmer might be blaming the genetic sire, or they are firing their nutritionist over the transition diet, or they are blaming overcrowding in the fresh pen, when in reality, the housing environment from 2 years ago is the hidden variable holding back those first lactation peaks. They simply don't have the behavioral resilience to fight a boss cow for their feed.
We need to evaluate the options for testing this so a farm doesn't have to flip the whole operation tomorrow. Let's look at the trade-offs of what we call the 30-day test versus the 90-day full transition.
A full transition takes serious time and management bandwidth. You have to adjust your milk feeding schedules. If you're using automated calf feeders, it simplifies things considerably because the machine handles the volume. But if you're bottle feeding or bucket feeding out of a side-by-side, your staff has to be retrained. They have to monitor pairs rather than individuals. They have to stand there and make sure one aggressive, greedy calf isn't bullying the other and drinking both bottles.
That is a real hurdle initially, but over time, those full transitions actually save massive amounts of labor. Think about the physical steps. Walking up to one shared pen and feeding 2 calves takes less time and fewer literal footsteps than walking to 2 completely separate, spread out hutches. Monitoring the health of one pair is faster than checking 2 isolated individuals. The labor efficiency of scaling this actually works in your favor once the team gets the hang of the new protocol.
I think we have beaten the theory and the data to death. We have laid out the physicist perspective, the economic math, the facility solutions, and the looming regulatory threat. Let's make this highly actionable for the listener.
All right, a farmer just finished milking and is driving to the feed store. What are the 3 things they need to remember from today?
Let's break it down into 3 distinct takeaways with timelines for each so you can actually implement this. Takeaway number 1 is what we are calling the 30-day pair test. For your immediate action this week, Don't change your whole farm. Don't cause a panic. Just pick your next 10 heifer calves to be born. Pair them up at 3 to 5 days old using the modified existing hutches. Use that UBC model where you just push 2 hutches together and share a single wire panel.
Keep it simple.
Exactly. For your medium-term strategy over the next 3 to 6 months, track them relentlessly. Track their solid feed intake, track their health events. Do they actually get more scours of BRD? And weigh them at weaning. Compare those 10 paired calves against 10 individual calves raised in the exact same weather conditions.
And long-term.
For your long-term positioning over the next 1 to 2 years, use that specific on-farm data to justify whether you scale this up to the whole herd. Your own farm's data beats a university study every single time.
Well, I love the pragmatism of that. Test it small, measure the results with your own eyes, then scale. What is takeaway 2?
Takeaway number 2 is the Day 1 hay protocol to kill the cross-sucking fear. Immediate action for this week. Start offering a handful of long-stem hay alongside the starter grain to all your pre-weaned calves from day 1. Ignore the old dogma and just start doing it tomorrow morning.
Just jump in.
Yep. Medium term, over the next 3 to 6 months, monitor the drop in cross-sucking behavior. Watch them closely as they approach weaning when that motivation to suck peaks. You will see a massive difference in their oral behavior. And long-term, over the next 1 to 2 years, make early hay provision a strictly written, non-negotiable standard operating procedure in your calf program protocols. Hand it to every new calf feeder you hire.
It is incredibly simple, cheap, and it solves the biggest behavioral complaint. What is the final takeaway?
Takeaway number 3 is all about regulatory and economic positioning. Immediate action this week. Walk out to your calf area and honestly assess your current hutch setup. Figure out exactly what it would cost in labor hours and minimal materials to remove shared walls or combined pens. Just do the mental math on the logistics so you know what you're up against.
Good advice.
Medium term, 3 to 6 months from now. Audit your current pre-wean mortality rate. Be brutally honest with your software records. If your death loss is over 5%, pull out a calculator and figure out your exact loss inventory value at today's $3,300 average replacement cost. Stare at that number until it makes you uncomfortable.
That'll motivate anyone.
Long term, 1 to 2 years out. Have a fully operational, smooth-running pair housing protocol in place well before those 2030 and 2031 international mandates hit the broader supply chain. Control the transition on your timeline, not the processor's timeline when they show up with an audit form.
Those are phenomenal, concrete steps that anyone can start today. And it all traces back to the value of having someone completely outside our industry bubble, looking at our daily practices with fresh eyes. The dairy industry was changed dramatically decades ago by Robert Chicoine, who showed us what one unconventional thinker could do with the bull nobody wanted. And now, Emily Miller-Cushon is showing us what a mathematical physicist's training does when you point it at a calf barn. It challenges the gospel, it redefines the math, and it changes the behavioral outcomes that your heifers carry for the rest of their lives. So here's a final provocative question for you to mull over on your drive back from the feed store. What is the most unconventional background on your farm team right now? Who is the outsider on your payroll? And what are they seeing that the dairy lifers have gone entirely blind to?
This has been another Bullvine podcast from the Bullvine Podcast. For more straight-talking industry analysis, head to www.thebullvine.com.
Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. We're out with new episodes every day, and upcoming topics will be the next installment of The Outsiders, featuring the software engineer who completely rewrote how we read bullpen.